And welcome to the Path of Most Persistence. This is a place where we hear and share tenacious stories overcoming obstacles with our partners who dare to share a bit of their own personal paths. We hope that these stories will provide inspiration, motivation, and illumination for all those who join us on this path. Today is Tuesday, October 26, 2021, and we are thrilled to have Dr. Adam D. Williams as our guest. Dr. Williams is a principal researcher and development systems engineer in the Center for Global Security and Cooperation at Sandia National Laboratories. He earned his PhD in engineering systems from MIT, his Master's of Arts degree in international affairs from the George Bush School of Government and Public Service from Texas A&M University, and his Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering, also from Texas A&M. Dr. Williams, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. So we have had the good fortune of having you as one of our contributing experts for our Clean Smarts Masterclass. Now, for our listeners, that is a program that we initiated last year. I guess it was during COVID when we were trying to really come up with creative opportunities, programming for our students. And because we're in a good situation as far as not only location, but because of our networks, we have wonderful colleagues that are in positions that are really ones that are impressive, not only on paper, but what they do day to day. And we thought if we partner with some of those experts in certain fields, that perhaps they would be willing to share some of their knowledge, their experience with students. So thank you for being a contributor to that. But can you just let our audience know perhaps what you're contributing this year?
Absolutely. So as part of the Clean Smarts program, I, along with a colleague of mine from Sandia, Miss Charisma Jackson, we spoke a little bit about global security, the last S in the SMARTS acronym. And what we provided was an overview of many of the complex technical and non-technical challenges related to the term global security. And our hope, again, was to help not only potentially inspire folks to look into STEM degrees and STEM professions, but also to encourage more technically minded people to look beyond their traditional problem set to see where maybe their skill set could serve larger purposes in the world.
And thank you for that. It was you and Charisma working together. That was outstanding. She was a contributor last year, right, and she did such a great job. And I was so happy that she was coming back, but not only coming back, but bringing reinforcement. You and your contributions were wonderful, and I think they're going to be very well received. Our students have started to register. The school year has begun, obviously, right, and they're just getting in the process of beginning some of our programs. But as I mentioned in the opening, we did that to create more opportunities. And for us, that was about persisting through the crisis and trying to come up with new programming, new opportunities, especially for our students that were at home having to do so much online. But I'm wondering, why did you say yes to that? I'm sure Charisma had her great proposal. It made you an offer maybe you couldn't refuse, but why would you say yes to something like that?
Absolutely. Well, I said yes to the opportunity for the same reason you created the opportunity in the first place, which was to help provide just a glimpse into some of the exciting opportunities and professional career choices available under the STEM umbrella, but also as just a novel, creative way to engage with a community, potentially some audience members that I wouldn't have the chance necessarily to do so in person. In part of my job, I do engage with students of various ages, primarily college students, and I've seen how much of a struggle it is to do all of your class, all of your life online. Yes. And so to the extent possible, we try to make it creative, we try to make it fun, and the Clean Smarts opportunity seemed like an interesting opportunity, and I hope it's well received and ultimately continues to breed the success that it has in the past.
Thank you. I'm sure it will. Going back to those students that you work with, those college level students, is that through a mentoring program, or is that part of something that you do on your own, or is part of what you do with the laboratory?
So it's primarily through my professional job. Part of what I do, part of the skill set that I've developed is how to help build academic programs at universities around the world. And so as part of that, I have the opportunity to engage with young people from multiple countries, multiple cultures, multiple backgrounds, and it's been a lot of fun. In addition, I also mentor, mostly professionally, a little bit unofficially, but I have several early career staff members and student interns who work on some of my projects. And so I enjoy the opportunity to help, essentially to help them avoid some of the pitfalls I made. One of the most popular quotes in academia is, right, you stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yes.
And you learn from those who have gone before. And so I'm not calling myself an academic giant by any stretch of the imagination, but I have learned a series of lessons that hopefully I can impart upon some of my younger colleagues to help them accelerate their careers a little bit more quickly.
There's so much I want to pull apart there. Just before we get too far into the conversation, can you tell our audience a little bit about what you do, just so that I know your title is probably very brief compared to what your responsibilities are, but can you just give us a brief summary just so that our audience can connect and identify a little bit more with you?
That's always the hard question.
Yes.
We like wordy, ambiguous job titles for that reason, so that way nobody asks us the follow-on question. So I think a simple way that I have found to describe what I do is I try to help develop and deploy systems-level technical solutions to complex real-world problems. That can range from, I mentioned academic programs, that can range from supporting efforts to enhance specific capabilities in a university in a partnering country. That can include working on kind of cutting edge analytical capabilities to address certain elements of security issues in critical infrastructure, and effectively everything in between. So that's probably the most succinct version.
Well, I appreciate that, and I understand. But I do want to ask, because I'm really intrigued. So Adam at 13, 14 years old, is this where Adam thought he would be? Did Adam think that one day...
Right. Great question. So Adam at 13 or 14 knew that Adam liked math, science, Legos, building things. I was a tinkerer. I assumed that would lead to a career in some type of kind of traditional engineering. I didn't have any specific flavor in mind at the time, but I'd always been interested in space, right? So I figured, why not be an engineer at NASA, help build the next space shuttle, Mars rover, Mars lander, one of those options. And so starting in high school, I began to orient most of my academic career towards favoring math and science. And then I came to A&M. Whoop, that's right. And it was my freshman year, and I was sitting in one of, I don't know if they are still around anymore, but freshman leadership organizations. So I was in one of those for engineering, and we had a guest speaker. And the guest speaker's name was James Olson, who is now a professor out at the Bush School. Prior to being at the Bush School, Mr. Olson was a spy for the CIA. And so he gave this very impassioned description and talk about the merits of public service and what it's like to serve your nation in multiple facets, including as a clandestine officer. And I was hooked, right? Hooked then and there. I walked up to him after the speech and said, "Hi, I'm Adam. How do I do what you do? I'm interested." And he effectively what he did in that 30 seconds was he assessed me and sized me up and he said, be at my office tomorrow. This was a Thursday evening. Be at my office tomorrow at 9, and we'll talk. And went to his office, chatted with him for about half an hour, was able to get into his class, and that began a series of dominoes that oriented my kind of technical career and professional interests toward public service, hence going to the Bush School. And then, through another series of events, I ended up at Sandia National Laboratories, where I get to, again, work each and every day to try to make the world a little bit of a better place.
Well, that is, again, I'm having a hard time keeping up with all the rabbits that are going off in all their trails. So so for those listening, especially young people, if they were to hear you make that comment about going up to this former spy, so to speak, and he assessed you at that moment, a lot of our students would say, wow, wasn't Adam lucky? That would never happen to me. What was it about you? Do you think that he looked at you and said, okay, he's the guy? Do you think it was just merely because of his techniques and training that he could identify characteristics about you? Or do you think it was perhaps how you approached him?
So I definitely think it was a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. And so more to the second version, where it was more about how I approached him. Mm-hmm. So I think walking up and having the confidence to say what you said was inspiring to me, I'm interested to know more, is a step. It is a positive step to take with just about anybody.
And could you always do that? Was that something you were always able to do, to approach people when you were interested in something?
Not necessarily. So I'm naturally an introvert, and I tend to avoid groups and crowds. But in that moment, I think I was just so intrigued by the opportunities that I could visualize that I just wanted to know more. Mm-hmm. And so to anybody listening who may find themselves in a similar situation, I think there are moments where, whether it's someone speaking or you read something, or maybe you see an advertisement or hear something on the radio, and when you can clearly see yourself in a version of that role, that's when I think you should, that should help give you the confidence to go up and try to find that next step.
That is beautiful, because I really want to spend a little bit of time on this, because I think so many of us, and especially young people, they may not recognize it because they're young and they haven't had many of those moments. But I think it's wonderful that maybe, especially listening to you, that they can start identifying those moments of clarity. Maybe when you can visualize yourself as this person that is before you, or in a situation that he describes. Right. I think, working with young people for so many years, I think that they all have those moments, but they don't know that that's a moment of action and of opportunity. And perhaps if they take it, it might lead to another opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can't recall when I kind of came up with this advice that I tend to give to people. But one of my favorite phrases is, the worst that can happen is they say no.
Absolutely. And
I understand that for some folks, and it was difficult for me at times and early on to hear no.
Yes.
Particularly when you're very excited about something.
Yes.
However, at the end of the day, when you weigh out what happened over the course of the day, if the worst thing that can happen is someone says no to a request for more information, for an opportunity, I think you're doing okay.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that particular door is closed for that opportunity. That just means that particular pathway may not be advantageous. And so if something is truly inspiring or interesting to you, find another pathway.
So that no isn't about truly stopping. It's maybe repivoting, calibrating, doing something to adjust, to continue on.
Right.
Nice. Very, very nice. I, in that moment when, you talked about being that young person, and liking math and science. I'm wondering, is that just something that came to you, or did you live in a home where that was encouraged, or was that your experience in school where you just were encouraged by it, or is it something that you just came upon yourself?
Again, a little bit of both.
Yeah.
You will notice a pattern in my answers. From as long as I can remember, again, I've been a tinkerer. I've enjoyed building, and so Lego was one of my favorite toys growing up. However, I would have to say that I had a series of phenomenal teachers, starting with one particular teacher in third grade who saw the potential and fostered it.
Third grade.
So, for example, in third grade, I remember we were working on multiplication tables, and I just happened to be progressing faster than the rest of the class. And so she let me. She didn't force me, but she let me. She fed that potential to the point where, and I know it was, looking back, it was clearly more work for her because she's now developing multiple lesson plans and worksheets and whatnot. But that's one example of where the teachers I had in primary and secondary school were just phenomenal in allowing my desire to do more, to be able to do more.
Yes.
And so I think for me, the combination of those two allowed me to see more of the potential of what could be when I focused more on math and science.
Absolutely. So I think that that's wonderful. And just because I was once, many, many years ago, I was once an elementary school teacher. So for the sake of that third grade teacher, do you mind giving her a shout out, what her name
Absolutely.
was?
Mrs. Linda Tayo. I doubt you're listening to this. I doubt you would remember me. You never know.
You never know.
However, it's those little moments that teachers can have in students' lives that will change the course of their lives. And, to the extent that I have success and contribute to anything bigger than myself, a lot of it can be traced back to her.
I think that's beautiful, and I think that those messages, especially again from someone in your position and your background, it's lovely again as an educator to hear you go back in time and to identify that moment when you were 7, 8 years old, right, perhaps. And I think that's always so important for our educators, those partners that listen in, because the demands of day to day, albeit, a third grade classroom, an 8th grade classroom, a senior classroom, it's challenging in and of itself.
I think that's an understatement. So thank you to all the teachers and the educators out there listening.
Yes, absolutely.
You are a categorically undervalued part of our society, and I apologize for that. But I thank you for what you've contributed to myself as well as my children who are now in school.
Well, I think you just speaking those words means so much, because you're right. I think most educators go into it because they have a love for children. They have a love for lifelong learning. They have a love for country because they know it's a foundation of the stability of our country. But I thank you for going back, because we partner again. Not only do we do things for students, but we do things for educators, and it's wonderful to be reminded of what they do every day is so important. So thank you for allowing me that time to go back to third grade with you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Talking about that, going back into a little bit of your experiences at Texas A&M, I'm curious how you selected Texas A&M. And I'm not speaking because we're here on campus, but I'm just curious because so many of our students are confused to where they want to go, why they want to go there, but why did you select?
Great question. Back when I was in high school, there was a few-month period where I was dead set against going anywhere in the state of Texas. I'm going to get out. I'm going to go explore the world.
Because you're a born and raised Texan?
Yes, more or less. Okay. It's a little circuitous, but yes, I am Texan. Born and raised. Every now and again, you'll hear the y'all slip out.
I get it.
I apologize, right? How did I get to A&M? Right. So in high school, I was looking at schools in California. I was looking at schools on the East Coast. And obviously, back in the early days of the internet, searching for best engineering programs. I didn't know what kind of engineering, just best engineering schools. Started looking at those lists, and again, as a budding engineer, there's a advantage column and disadvantage column, right? I had a whole table built out. But it wasn't until I got to cost, right, that all of a sudden the reality set in that, okay, A&M's still high on this list, right?
Yes.
Let's go ahead and go there. And when I was, as I started getting into the later years of high school, I had friends who went to A&M, so I'd come down and hang out with them on the weekends. And I really did fall in love with the atmosphere. Now, granted, driving through campus today, it is much different than when I was here, and it's not bad. It's just different.
It's a lot of growth. It's a lot of growth,
yeah. which is amazing for the university and for the additional students that it can serve. But I remember my time here at A&M very fondly. And, I think an interesting question isn't so much why did I choose A&M out of high school. A more interesting question is why did I choose to stay at A&M after I finished my undergrad.
That's true.
And, a large part of that. So when, again, going back to my interaction with James Olson, story about persistence, if you will. So at that point, after I took his course the fall semester of my sophomore year, which was the fall of 2001. So, of course, right, world-altering events in the middle of that semester very much oriented my desire to help serve in some capacity. However, I was 40% through an engineering degree program. And for me to have switched degrees at that point to say political science or to switch out of engineering, all of those engineering courses would have counted for 2 math classes. So I effectively would have been starting over. And I was like, well, I'm already this far into it, might as well finish it up. Who knows what will happen? Right. So, which was kind of an interesting, looking back, an interesting amount of insight or laziness, right? I'm going to go with insight just to make myself look a little bit better, but maybe it was just laziness to decide to stick with an engineering curriculum that is difficult by design and for good reason. So I finished my engineering degree, and so I start looking at graduate schools focusing on international affairs, national security, those types of programs. And the Bush School was still fairly new back then. It was in my top 5, but I had applied to several schools on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. I was accepted to all but one. I got nice financial offers from most of them, but there was just something about this place. And by this, if you're listening and not watching, this place being right College Station and Texas A&M University specifically, that I felt I could have more of an impact both on the program here as it was growing, but take advantage of more opportunities that the program itself was seeking as it grew. And so that's how I ended up here.
That's interesting, and the Bush School is fascinating. Whenever I get to visit, which isn't very often, I learn something new every time. So do you get to come back and visit very often?
So not as much as I would like, but hopefully I can do more of that here in the near future.
That's great. Stretching that out a little bit further, you've mentioned public service a few times throughout our talk, and I know maybe you don't have a favorite public servant out there. You probably mentioned one that is probably toward the top of the list, but I'm just wondering, maybe not favorite, but maybe those that have really made impacts that really resonate with you.
Sure. And
maybe ones that are maybe not as known as others that maybe our audience maybe should learn more about or not.
Ooh, oh wow. Okay. In no particular order.
Yes.
And unfortunately, this gentleman passed away just last week, but Colin Powell. Yeah. And I never had the opportunity to meet him, but my father was an Army officer and fought under Colin Powell in the early 90s. And his description of Colin Powell is powerful. My only interaction with Colin Powell was when I was here at A&M. There was a special event where Henry Kissinger was the guest speaker. And so as the professor came out to introduce Henry Kissinger, out of the wings of the stage came Colin Powell, who happened to be in town visiting his old friend, George Bush. And just his presence and the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence with which he spoke, and just the respect that he seemed to command from anybody who's spoken about him is, to me, is a master class in character, right? Soft-spoken, humble, but very clearly capable and excelled at his job. Yeah. Let's see, another public servant that I respect tremendously is Robert Gates. So former president of the university, former dean of the Bush School. And I had the opportunity to engage with him a handful of times. He was president while I was here at A&M. But for me, what spoke, the element of his career that put him on my list in answer to your question was the fact that he was, when he served as Secretary of Defense, he did so over the change of an administration for an extremely amount of time. So he was respected enough by both political parties to effectively do that job.
Yes.
And for those of you listening who understand the magnitude of that statement, just let that sink in and think about how you would need to carry yourself, how you would need to interact with people you agree with, that you don't agree with, to have that occur. And for audience members who don't understand the gravity of that, ask somebody, and it'll be an enlightening conversation. Yes. Those are two that jump to the top of my mind, and I could go down this rabbit hole for a very long time, but I do want to kind of mention one other, and it's not necessarily a specific individual, right? But some of the greatest lessons that I have learned in my life have been from custodial staffers. And I know that might come across as different, shall we say, but in various points in my life, whether it was a kind word as I was having a hard day, or just the quiet dignity with which they do a job that much of our society just disregards, that will always speak powerfully to me. And so I encourage anybody listening, at your workplace, at your school, anywhere you see, if you have custodial staffers, learn their name, tell them hi. Just like with teachers and educators, it can really make someone's day. So.
Thank you so much for acknowledging them, because those are those unsung heroes.
Right. That was the phrase I was looking for. Thank you.
Those truly, again, my former life being an elementary school teacher, but also a high school principal.
Oh, wow.
The backbone, you cannot conduct business if it were not for the work of not only custodial, but cafeteria folks.
Correct.
All those incredible professionals that do their work with such humility and dignity and really selflessness. So thank you for bringing them back up. I really, truly appreciate that. But I want to go back. You mentioned your father served under Colin
Correct.
Powell, and you said the way he described him. How did he describe him?
It had to, so the anecdotes that I've been privy to, right, where you have many high-level officials in a room around a table, and you have the accompanying staff members either sitting along the wall or standing in the back, and just the ability to encourage straight talk. So don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me what I need to hear. And if the information wasn't positive or the best, to be able to take a breath and say, effectively, here are the cards we're dealt, here's what we're doing. And to be able to do so in a way that wasn't overbearing, but still quite powerful.
Yes. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing those memories that your father shared. I think that's incredibly important, and the timeliness of our conversation I'm so appreciative of, because you're bringing up some individuals that really we need to honor their memory and all their service. So with all that, I'm trying to be mindful of the time because I know you have other responsibilities. But are there any other topics or areas of persistence that maybe you prepped for? You thought, oh, I have a story to share, or maybe I would want my children to hear, or my colleagues?
So I'm sure as I start talking, some of them will flood. What I would like to start with is a quote from a man named Howard Terry, who funded his scholarship foundation funded my undergraduate degree. And one of his quotes is, luck favors those who work hard, right? So when something is hard, don't be afraid of it. When something is hard, whether you succeed or fail, you're going to learn something. And I think that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I didn't learn until I wish I would have learned sooner, shall we say, that even in what you might call a failure, you can still learn. And what I learn each and every day in my job as a researcher is actually you learn a ton more from failures than you do from actually succeeding. Because when the experiment doesn't work, when your term paper doesn't get the grade you want, when you don't get the grade you want on your test, it gives you the opportunity to go back and ask why. And so, and it's probably a different take on persistence, but those that take that opportunity to ask why and persist to understand, ultimately will, from my experience, will come out better in the end.
Absolutely. So, as we begin to close out, I continue to always think about young people and those that I hope that are listening. And you mentioned earlier on in the conversation that you've engaged and worked with young people all over the world. And I'm curious, from your perspective, some of those characteristics, those that transcend country, those that transcend culture, what characteristics can you share that you've gleaned from these young people that you've observed that maybe those that are listening can harness, identify within themselves? If not, maybe they can nurture them in some way. Sure. What are those characteristics that you've seen transcending countries, cultures, that our listeners can galvanize against?
Fantastic. So this one's pretty easy for me. So the first one is curiosity, and the second one is critical thinking. Curiosity, inquisitiveness, wanting to understand the information presented to you at a deeper level. Sometimes that comes across as the student who always asks, well, why? 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 And asking that question isn't necessarily wrong. And so I think curiosity is important because it shows a level of interest to want to understand a little bit better. And from my experience, both working with students and from my own career, wanting to understand better, wanting to gain additional perspectives will only help you understand what you're trying to do that much better. In terms of critical thinking, this one is a little trickier. And so critical thinking is the ability to evaluate information presented as objectively as possible, which means sometimes you're going to hear information from a perspective that you completely disagree with. And so rather than going, no, you're wrong, I'm right, you take a second and you try to evaluate, why would this person say this? What merits do they see in it? And again, trying to evaluate and assess those kinds of discussions, that kind of information, in a way that will allow you to help make as objective a discernment as possible. And so when you marry curiosity and critical thinking, you allow creativity and innovation and inquisitiveness to take over, but it's molded by kind of a structured process that when combined can really create some wonderful solutions. And so the highest achieving students, the most capable, the ones that have the highest or the fastest arc on their careers are those students that had a combination of those two characteristics.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And as we close, I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for being with us today. I know that our listeners will greatly appreciate your comments and your thoughts and definitely the experiences that you were able to share with us. So to our listeners, thank you for listening in. I hope that you listened to the entire chat that we've had today, along with all of our other guests that we've had in previous episodes. But for now, we say goodbye. Stay curious and stay humble in your endeavors. Have a great day.